A very good morning, colleagues, and hope you all are well. Welcome to our Friday session. And this week we have a bit more work to complete, considering the fact that it's our last session together. I hope that you're all well and rested and looking forward to the weekend, and more especially towards the latter part of this course as we start rounding up the course, but more specifically looking at what your assessments are and what you need to do. We have about 20 people that have joined us so far, so we'll give the others a few more minutes to join us, but we can start so that we don't waste anybody's time. Uh, so I'm hoping that my screen is actually visible to all of you. Can somebody just confirm my screen is visible?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much. Thanks, colleagues. Okay, so colleagues, just some clarification. So you will note that this morning, early parts of this morning, I emailed you the Word document with Study Unit 4, Study Unit 5, and the assessment criteria. And I also emailed you the readings for this specific 2 units. I have not uploaded. Okay, sorry, colleagues. When you join, can you please just mute so that it avoids any disruption, but also for the recording purposes as well. Thank you. So, colleagues, as I said, this morning you would have noticed that I've emailed you the study unit 4 and 5 in a Word document together with the readings. And then the latter part of the document has the assessment, which we will discuss today. Unfortunately, our UNISA server is actually it's actually very slow. So some of you might have had a challenge in the course of the week to access the UNISA server. It so happens that we have one MOOC which is compulsory for all first-year students at UNISA. So that means all students that want to apply to UNISA needs to complete one of these compulsory MOOCs to accept the offer at UNISA. Now, there's an interesting reason or rationale behind that. It's specifically to orientate students to what it means to be in a distance learning context. And unfortunately, with more than 40,000 students logging onto the site every single hour, it becomes a bit difficult, and it actually jammed our server. So at the moment, ICT has been working throughout the week to increase the server capacity and the databases so we can have a more effective server. And hopefully by the end of today, they will have that resolved. And then you will find by the weekend, you will find the course content that I circulated this morning completely uploaded on the site for you to access. But let's look at the documents so that we can have an understanding of what we are looking forward to, particularly in this study unit. So study unit 4. So today we're going to discuss study unit 4 and study unit 5. And as I mentioned last week, study unit 4 and study unit 5, I've reduced the content on it, and I've also reduced the marks on the assignments so that it allows us to complete this course by the due date of 26 with the final marks being submitted to DUT. So study unit 4 looks at effective and standard compliant educational technology content. And just from the title of the study unit alone, effective and standard compliant, and the issue of compliance when it comes into technology integration in higher education. And there are many principles of looking at what effective standard compliance could mean. I mean, right from the beginning, I mentioned this previously as well, the idea of us thinking of the quality assuring our design elements, how we integrate technology, the type of technology that we integrate into this. For example, one of the compliance issues when it comes to technology integration, specifically for our South African context, is that when we are integrating videos, we must ensure that the videos are at a compatible size that doesn't cost too much to stream or too much to download. So those are some of the compliance issues that we have that are contextually relevant issues. And often I find when I work with students, I tell them that these videos are generally 3 minutes or 4 minutes, or we tell academics when they're designing, short video clips are easier to watch. It's less lagging, less data, easier to stream. So those kind of elements that comes quite important when we are thinking of technology design and how we integrate technology as part of our higher education environment in teaching and learning, but more specifically the contextual factors that starts to shape and refine the issue of compliance. But specifically for this particular study unit, I thought to myself that it makes it a bit difficult for us to look at all the issues that we want to cover. But what might be more better is that we refine it to specifically looking at creating inclusive teaching and learning spaces when it comes to technology integration. And for this, I've narrowed the focus down much more. I've had a few more outcomes, but I thought let's just narrow it down specifically to the universal design principles and what we call in short, the UD principles, right? So in this study unit, we're going to look more specifically at the universal design principles, the UD principles, and what it means for us when we start talking about technology integration in teaching and learning. Now, the two readings that I've circulated here are the first one by Maguire, Scott, and Shaw on universal design and its application in educational environments, and the second one by Cheryl Burgstaller on universal design process, principles, and applications. I've circulated both those readings to you, but you can also, these are the links from where these readings are actually taken. Now, let's look at some of the preliminary comments. So I started off by thinking of why do we need to think of universal design principles? Why is this something
I'm
important?
sorry, excuse me, Prof. Can you please increase the font? Thanks.
Thank you very much. Okay, so this makes it much easier since it's a Word document. Is this better?
It's better now.
Thanks. Okay, so in terms of preliminary comments, I started saying just why do we need to consider universal design principles? Now, we know that we want to be innovative. We know that we want to integrate technology. We want to benchmark ourselves against some of the international practices. We know that we want to create these spaces not just for the nice to haves, but to create a much more conducive space for our students. And that, for me, is the most important thing. But there's something quite important here, colleagues, and I'm not sure about your own institutional policies, but maybe you need to think to look at some of these policies in terms of students that are differently enabled. But coming from my own institution context, one of the challenges is that the students that are differently enabled do not need to disclose that they have a disability, right? So it means that students that are differently enabled can be sitting in a virtual classroom, online classroom, and they may not be needed to disclose that identity, which means we need to design our spaces with the assumption that we have students that are differently enabled as part of our classes, right? So that we do not discriminate against students that are differently enabled. Now, what this means for us is that we need to start educating our academics, our instructional designers, our course designers to think of designing inclusive teaching and learning spaces. That doesn't just mean when we think about designing inclusive teaching and learning spaces, the general discourse has been students that are blind, we include Braille, students that cannot hear, that we include some kind of text, or students that cannot see, those kind of elements. But it goes beyond that. When we start thinking of designing inclusive spaces, it means there are certain principles that starts to guide us in terms of our instructional design, in terms of our technology integration. And this is what I want to unpack in this particular study unit, right? So applying universal design principles. Now, in the previous study unit, we looked at the notion of Ubuntu. You remember last week we discussed the notion of Ubuntu and the philosophy of social embeddedness. Now, Ubuntu also incorporates the idea that we do not discriminate against our learners that are differently enabled. So it means thinking about the inclusive nature that matches the communities of learning, that kind of element as well. So building on what we did last week, the idea of Ubuntu inclusive learning spaces, we now want to look at how we design these spaces. And the article that we've flagged more specifically here is the article by, the first one we want to work on is Maguire, specifically by John Maguire. Now, this is the reading which I've emailed to you. So you will see this reading when you've opened your email already. But John Maguire talks about the idea of inclusive college teaching, universal design for instructional and diverse learners. And right from the title itself, you can see the idea of diverse learners being flagged. Now, this is important because when we talk of, or many of our discourses, our policies inside the institution flags innovation, but we don't flag innovation that is inclusive. We don't think of what the implications of technology integration is for diverse students, diverse learners. But this particular study unit now forces us to think of technology in our teaching and learning space and our student profile. So the three-way discussion that goes about. So let's look at what Maguire talks about now, right? So the first learning activity I've given you is where you watch a video And let's just watch this video. I think let's just watch this video quickly as part of an introduction to what it means to talk about inclusive design, and talks about more specifically students that are differently
If you wear
labeled.
glasses or contacts, you must see this. An award-winning doctor reveals an astonishing.
Imagine you went into a big clothes store, and all that was on sale was one type of outfit, in one size, with no thought given to different individual body shapes or personalities. That would be crazy, right? Expecting everyone to be able to fit into the same size and express themselves in the same colour and style? Yet in many cases, that's exactly what is happening in our education system. When it comes to learning, variability is the rule, not the exception, and our college campuses are now grappling with the demands of an increasingly diverse cohort of learners, with increasing numbers of international students, students from different cultural and socio-economic backgrounds, mature students, and students with disabilities. Despite this, curriculums are still designed for the mythical average learner, and all are expected to engage and learn on the same terms. Not enough flexibility is built in at the design stage to give all students equal opportunities to learn in ways that play to their own strengths. So, how can our institutions respond to these challenges? Enter Universal Design for Learning, or UDL for short. UDL is an educational framework that guides the design of learning goals, materials, methods, and assessments, as well as the policies surrounding these curricular elements, with the diversity of learners in mind. The framework was developed by US organization CAST and is based on research in the field of neuroscience. It promotes 3 core principles for educators to build into their teaching practice, calling on them to provide students with multiple means of engagement, representation, and action and expression. The framework includes a set of guidelines on how you can turn these principles into practice. For example, by fostering collaboration with the introduction of group work with clear goals, roles, and responsibilities. Different types of media to support learning, and ensuring that all materials are accessible. And by providing a choice of assessment instruments while maintaining robust learning outcomes. You are probably already including some UDL elements in your practice without realizing it, and there's much more to explore. So don't be afraid to let Universal Design for Learning give you a new lens through which to look at your teaching and learning practice and help you to better reach all of your students. For more information and resources, visit ahead.ie/UDL.
Okay, colleagues, so that gives you a good introduction video to what is UDL principles, and more specifically, the kind of idea that comes up quite nicely here is the diversity issue. We have diverse students, so why should our learning approaches, our teaching and learning approaches, be a one-size-fits-all approach? And this becomes much more important when we start thinking of how technology starts to shape these spaces, but it forces us to think of diversity in terms of diverse students. Now, universal design, and you heard the concept UDL, right? So universal design and UDL, the added L, is universal design for learning. Now, in this document, the authors speak of the concept of UD goes beyond the mere provision of special features for various segments of the population. Instead, it emphasizes a creative approach that is more inclusive, one that asks at the outset the design process of how a product, graphic, communication, building, or public space can be made aesthetically pleasing and functional for the greatest numbers of users. Now, this is quite important because the above statement illustrates, the evolution of the concept, that universal design has evolved from just physical learning spaces being more accessible, wheelchair friendly, etc., to now creating online content, online learning spaces that caters for this diversity of students. And this is where the issue of compliance comes in now in terms of how we design it. Now, if we look at the 3 elements that are described by UD, universal design for learning, universal design for instruction, and universal instructional design. So they kind of break these up into 3 spaces. Universal design for learning. How does UD principles apply to learning? How do the UD principles apply for instruction? Means that the facilitator or academic instructing your student in the spaces. And then the instructional design talks about the entire medium in which we design the content, design the learning experience. How does the universal design principles come with an issue of compliance in these three different dimensions? Now let's look at what this means for us. The UDL, the Universal Design for Learning, firstly. Now, the first emphasis is on the integration of UD in the curriculum development, and it draws an example from CAST, which was a Center of Applied Special Technology, and it articulates three essential qualities of the approach. Curriculum that provides multiple means of representation. That's the first one, right? Curriculum that provides multiple means of expression, and curriculum that provides multiple means of engagement. So if you look at the three elements here, representation, expression, and engagement. So that means when we talk about designing and integrating technology in learning, the three elements of how we design our curriculum that provides multiple opportunities for representing the content in different ways, for students to express the different learning styles, different learning approaches, and engagement for students to allow the multiple engagements in these technology spaces. This becomes quite critical for us. Now, if you look at many of the more contemporary learning management systems, there are many, if it's Blackboard, Moodle, or Sakai, there are many plug-in applications that caters for these types of expressions in your online space. So for example, multiple means of representation, how we represent the content in different ways. So if you look at just what we are seeing in the screen itself, on Microsoft feature allows for dictate, which allows you to speak and it basically captures the text. You also have some facilities, for example, you have PDF readers that allows for the reading of the text as part of a way to access the learning content. So this becomes quite critical in terms of looking at some of the more modern learning management platforms and how these plugins can be integrated to cater for the universal design learning principles, specifically for learning. Now, and this is quite interesting, is that if we think, for example, some of the features are as dictate or reading a PDF document, those are not restricted to students that are differently enabled. I mean, these are some of the features that we may also find comfortable to use. And I mean, for example, dictate or reading a PDF document, these are features that I normally use that are easier way to navigate myself through some of the documents that are more dense, that allows you to read those documents. So this is what I'm talking about, colleagues, in terms of inclusive design, is that the inclusive approach is not just for students that are differently enabled. It is to make the learning process more efficient, more seamless. And these are some features that allows for that while we are still catering for students that are differently enabled. Now let's look at universal. So you've got these activities as part of it, and you'll see it on the online platform as well. Let us look at now what it means for the UD principles for instruction, specifically instruction, right? So the UDI model, the universal design for instruction, aims to close the gap between content, subject experts, and the pedagogy. Now, when we talk of emerging pedagogies, etc., we see reflective practice as important, but in terms of UD, right, UDI, Universal Design Instruction. So remember UDL, Universal Design for Learning, UDI, Universal Design for Instruction. There are 9 principles, right, that are extracted from the more comprehensive document on the Universal Design Principles. Principle 1 is equitable use. Principle 2 is flexibility in use. Principle 3 is simple and intuitive. Principle 4 is perceptible information. Principle 5 is tolerance for error. Principle 6 is low physical effort, and this becomes quite important if we think of students that are differently enabled. Size and space of approach and use. Now, this is quite important as well. Principle 7. Specifically, if you've got classroom context that you're talking about and you're talking about technology integrated in a classroom context, that becomes quite critical. For example, where you position your whiteboard, etc. That all these are elements of, and some of us may think of, just integrating a whiteboard or a smart board into our classroom setup that allows for us to innovate into technology. But when we think about now students that are differently enabled, we need to think of distance, space, etc. that talks to the technology integration, even in a physical classroom setup, right? A community of learners and principal, and then instructional climate means basically instructional space this occurs, right? Then let's look at universal UDD, right? UID, Universal Instructional Design, right? And the Universal Instructional Design model focuses on the educational environment specifically. And here we find the emphasis is on researching and creating inclusive teaching and learning spaces that cater for diverse learners. Now, instructional design implies that how we design our teaching and learning approaches. A good example of this from the University of Guelph, and I put in a link where you can look at how they actually draw up a framework for how they see this design as part of their approach. But when we talk about the research element of this, and this becomes quite critical, is to think about student experience. And in the previous courses I mentioned, or previous study units, I mentioned about learning analytics, understanding how students behave. And by gaining that data, we are also able to see from a general, remember at my earlier point of students not being forced to disclose their disability, but through the data that we achieve on student behaviors, we are able to see how students engage in online platforms, what they are looking for, the challenges that they have. And that becomes quite important for us, specifically when we start thinking of designing inclusive spaces, right? Now, you've also got another learning activity which talks about UD and applying these concepts in your own environment. Now, let's look at the universal design principles and technology integration. Now, we're narrowing the discussion specifically to technology integration. And to do this, we then look at the article by Cheryl Bergstaller on universal design process, principles, and application, right? And in this article, Cheryl Bergstaller talks about Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, WCAG. You might have heard of this abbreviation before. It requires technology in education to have the following 4 qualities, right? Perceivable, first one. Users must be able to perceive the content regardless of the device or configuration they are using. It means that whether a student is using a mobile phone, a desktop, a laptop, or an iPad, the experience to perceive what the content is must be applicable across all these devices. Now, this is quite important because if, for example, you start thinking of students that are blind, they cannot see, and you have some of these reading gadgets that allows for reading of the content, right? It means that the content must be structured in such a way that allows for the seamless reading of that content to that student that is blind and cannot see the content. Operable. Users must be able to operate the controls, buttons, sliders, menus, regardless of the device they are using. So the kind of standard features that you will have, and you see these elements applying in our learning management systems. Very simple mechanisms, simple navigations that regardless of the device, it must be operable by any student. Understandable, users must be able to understand the content and the interface, and then robust content must be coded in compliance with relevant coding standards in order to ensure it is accurately and meaningfully interpreted by devices, browsers, and assistive technologies. Remember, assistive technologies such as those that read the device, Braille, etc. Right? So these are this is what makes the whole issue of compliance very critical for us in our higher education context. It's when we start thinking of innovation, and many of us, and I can talk from experience from even from my own institutional context, the issue of inclusivity is very seldomly flagged as an important discourse in our institutions. Sometimes we drive the innovation discourse by technology, affordability, application, what our students can skills, but we tend to sideline or have a very minor discourse on the issue of accessibility and inclusive accessibility, right? And this is where this becomes quite critical for us when we start thinking of educational technology in higher education, is to go beyond the discussion of just innovation, but to think of inclusive innovation in technology. Now, Cheryl Bergstaller sees the integration in the following 4 steps, right? Provide multiple ways for participants to learn and to demonstrate what they have learned, provide multiple ways to engage, and ensure all technologies, facilitate services, resources, and strategies are accessible to individuals with a wide variety of disabilities. Now, for example, okay, colleagues, just a reminder, when you log in, please mute. So it gives us less disruption, but also it affects the recording later on, you'll see. Okay, so colleagues, let's look at the application of UD principles now and the examples of Washington State University. Now, here we draw a few examples on what it means to have, for example, equitable use, flexibility in use, etc. The following table provides some practices that builds upon each of the items of the 4 sets of principles and that underpin the UD framework. Now, equitable use examples of practice that applies to principles, career services, job posting, accessible to people with a great variety of abilities, disabilities, ages, racial, ethnic, and technologies. Now, this is quite important because you see the issue of for us in the South African context, equitable use, and this becomes very important, is when we start talking about technologies, we can't talk, and there is no way, and I argue this in many spaces. We cannot have a discussion on technology integration in South Africa without the racial ethnic background issue, because we know for a fact that we've come from social classes that have been disadvantaged. So when we talk of the idea of equitable use, we have to flag this. This is an important part of our student profiling, an important part of technology literacy skills. So the idea here is, while we don't generalize, is not to ignore the reality on the ground that we have students that have been racially prejudiced against the access to technology and the digital literacy skills that are needed. Now, in saying that, I'm also not saying that all those students who had a privilege to technology before have the necessary skills, because I've seen that also being a deficit. It doesn't necessarily mean that a student has access to a technology, has access to a device, that they can use that device in a proper way, or they can use that device in its full optimal performance for teaching and learning. So access to a device on the other end doesn't necessarily mean that they have the full level of skills to engage with this, right? Flexibility in use. And we've seen, for example, in Washington University, what they call is a campus museum that exhibits design, allows visitors to choose or read or listen descriptions and content, displays cases. Now, this is also an important thing. I've seen many universities, not just Washington universities, I've seen this in the Netherlands as well, the idea of what we call a much more integrated campus life with these of augmented reality, virtual reality technology that is now becoming what we call an immersive learning experience as part of this, but caters for those students that are differently enabled. UD3, simple and intuitive. Testing is conducted in a predictable, straightforward manner. So that means our assessment strategies when we start using technology caters for those students that are differently enabled. And one of the things that you might have engaged with, or you might have addressed this as part of your assessments when you moved online in 2020, or even the current situation, is to allow that flexibility in terms of time for those students that are differently enabled. Now, as I said earlier, we don't force our students to disclose their status of being differently enabled, but what we do is accommodate for those students with a little bit of extra time. So, for example, if an assessment is a 2-hour online assessment, we build in 2 hour, for example, 2 hour 30 minutes, with an assumption that those students who are differently enabled will have that extra time to complete those courses. And in such cases, colleagues, we do ask for students that are differently enabled who need to have that extra time to apply for that extra time. Because if we simply add in that extra 30 minutes to the 2-hour assessment, then the assessment becomes 2 hours, 30 minutes, but it doesn't really give the student that is differently enabled an advantage, because every student has that space. So this is where we actually force our students to say, if you're differently enabled and you want that extra time, please apply for us. There's a provision for that in terms of assessment, right? Then perceptible information, and here, for example, in Washington University, they talk about the idea of visual, oral, and kinesthetic characteristics in the dorm, etc. Tolerance for error. Instructional software and application provides guidance when a student makes an inappropriate selection. This is something we don't actually have in our context. We don't have instructional software that actually allows a student, but one of the things that we see coming out more strongly in these spaces is what we call personalized electronic tutoring systems, personalized learning spaces that allows for those instructional levels, allows for students to say, if you selected a wrong option, it can speak to the student and say, click this, it's a wrong option, etc., or give an error message, right? Then low physical effort. Curriculum software includes on-screen control buttons that are large enough for students that are with limited fine motor skills to select. Now, as we've seen throughout my presentation for the past 3 weeks, one of the most common mistakes that I've made is to assume that my screen size, which is conducive to me, is conducive to everybody that is seeing this, and that obviously shouldn't be taken for granted. So here as well is the idea of on-screen controls that become much more larger for students, or allows the flexibility, for example, in an LMS to allow the student to increase the size, etc. So those are things now that we forced to say beyond innovation to application. And I think this is where many of our institutions are stuck in terms of our discourse on innovation. Is we talk about innovation, but we don't actually engage with the application on this from the students that are differently enabled. Size and space approach, and if you look at the one in Washington University, they talk about flexible work area, etc. And multiple means of engagement cause multiple examples to ensure relevance and diverse student group. And here we're talking about the UDL principles. So we went from UD, universal design, to now UDL principles, right? Multiple means of engagement causes multiple examples ensure relevance to diverse student groups. Multiple means of representation promote service forms of accessible design media are used to communicate. An accessible design of media, which means that if you are, for example, using a YouTube video, and as you would have seen in the first video that we watched on students that are differently enabled, is while the video is playing, while you got sound, so you can see the image, you can hear the image, you can also read the text, right? So it caters across those three elements. And that's what it means, multiple forms of. And one of the things that we actually encourage as part of our design is to ensure that you have a transcript as part of it, or if you look at YouTube, the paid feature actually allows for those captions to be added as part of this. And even the Teams itself that we are using, the Teams allows you to turn on, the MS Teams allows you to turn on captions while we are even presenting. So for a student who cannot hear, it allows for captions while I am talking, the captions to come emerge, to kind of emerge on the screen for the students to see this as well. Multiple means of action and expression, cause project, and assign project optimized individual choice and autonomy, so we cater for that diversity as well. And then in terms of the web content, etc., the Wcag principles, perceivable. A person who is blind and using a screen reader can access the content in images because text descriptions are provided. And you find that that's something that we don't actually do in many of our learning management systems, is that when you insert an image, what you are actually forced to do is, if this is an image that we insert, so for example, if this was an image that you insert on your learning management system, there should be a description to this image on the learning management system. So that means if a student cannot read, they will able to simply click on the image, and the description that you have, or the content that you have as detail in the image on that, will then display for the student as part of the reader, etc. Right? Then the operable one is learning management system. A person cannot operate a mouse, can navigate the content by functions of a keyboard or touchscreen, etc. Understandable instruction materials, definitions are provided and usable, word phrases, idioms, and abbreviations. And this becomes, colleagues, more important for us in the South African context when we start. And, you know, one of the biggest discourses with Western knowledge hegemony is that much of the knowledge that we have are out of reach of our students that come up from the African context. So instruction design also means that the kind of concepts we use, the idioms, the phrases, etc., must be accessible and understandable to our students, even in these spaces that we use. Robust application forms, electronic forms can be completed using a wide range of devices, including assistive technologies. That's quite critical, right? And in conclusion, for this study unit, we focus on UD principles, the UDL principles, universal design learning principles, and UID, universal instructional design principles. So 3 phases: UDL, universal design learning principles; UDI, universal design instruction; and UID, universal instructional design principles. But what it means, it actually forced us now to move beyond our comfort zones of innovation to now start thinking of our students, and more specifically how we integrate some of these technologies in spaces where our students are not compelled to define their disability. So colleagues, in this course, as I said, I've given you an assessment, and this assessment is for your portfolio. And one of the things I've asked you now to do, and this is, remember, throughout this assessment, throughout the assessments in this course, I want to see that you are able to contextualize the knowledge that you've gained and implement it in your own context. So for example, in this assignment, I draw out on this question of your portfolio, I draw out an extraction of a diagram from the Washington Design Principles application, where it talks about identity, identify the application, best practices in the field, consider diverse characteristics of potential users, integrate UDHI, best practice in the field, plan for accommodation, evaluate. So what I ask you to do here is to simply develop a UD and technology integration teaching and learning framework for your own institution. explain how you would apply the following processes here below and what you've learned above in your own higher education context. And you can draw on explanations in the core reading or any other readings that you want. So all I want to see here is that you can develop some type of framework using the UDL, UDI, and UID elements as part of how this can be applicable to your institution. Now, let me stress here, colleagues, is that what I'm looking for here is that while we think of innovation, we think of inclusive innovation. And that's what I want to assess here, is that you can frame something as integrating education technology in your own, but you can be compliant in thinking of and develop standards and compliance in thinking of inclusive technology, right? And here, minimum of 3 references. Now, remember, I told you that the assignments for your questions for study unit 4 and study unit 5 are lesser in terms of marks. So here, I only asked you to be 750 to 1,000 words, 3 references, and this carries 15% of your portfolio. So I reduced it so that you can able to complete this much more faster than the other earlier two portfolio questions. So colleagues, let's stop here before we go on to the next study unit. I just want to open up for any questions or comments on this study unit. Any questions, comments on this study unit, colleagues, or anything that you want to share about how you integrate technology as inclusive in your own institution? Please feel free. You can just pick up your hands if you want to say anything. Yes, Sam, go ahead. Sam, you can unmute and carry on.
Good morning, colleagues.
Morning,
Good morning,
Sam.
Professor Chetin. How are you doing today?
All good, Sam. Yourself?
Okay, I just wanted to find out about this assignment. You are saying it 15 mark out of the portfolio. Is there going to be another assignment for another mark?
Sorry, Sam, I missed that last part.
Okay, this assignment is 15 mark.
Yes.
I'm asking, this assignment is 15. What is the mark for this assignment?
Oh, okay. No. So remember, as I said earlier, and I'll show you this when we finish the next study unit, Sam. Remember that each of these assignments, so we mark it out of 100, but it carries a weight of 15%. So we convert the mark out of 100 to 15% to give you your final mark.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now I'm wondering where, or if it is 15% of 100, are we going to do another assignment that will give us the other mark left?
Yes, Sam. Okay, Sam, let me come towards the end of if you looked at your document, I'll come towards the end of, when I finish the next study unit, I will discuss the complete assessment structure and how this 15% fits into your full portfolio mark.
Okay.
Okay, thanks, Sam.
Yeah.
Thanks. Any other colleagues, anything else that you want to share with us on how or how many institutions have actually discussed innovation and inclusive technology? That's an important one. I think that's an important point for us to actually unpack, is whether our institutions have actually flagged this as an important element. Anybody can share with us some of the good practices that you've had, or whether you haven't actually done this in the institution? Yes, John.
Yes. Thank you very much. Good morning, colleagues. Yeah, the issue of inclusive education has always been a bit of an issue, and especially when we relate this to this emergence. I don't know. Are we still in the emergence remote teaching, or we way past that phase? Because I think we did time to make adjustments where they are needed. Are we still in the ERT?
That's a good question, Sam, because everyone talks of the new norm. I'm not too sure whether we just became accustomed to this now as being our new way of teaching and learning. But I've seen many institutions that, for example, even my own institution, this year has literally been the same, a type of crisis restructuring to address the save the academic year. So I think some institutions are still, their academic year will only finish in March next year, if I'm right. I'm not too sure about the colleagues that are here. But which means that we are still in that phase. Yes.
So now, since we have been caught off guard by this COVID-19 and the new normal, the new emergent normal, I think the issue of inclusivity or inclusive education was, however, somewhere compromised, because remember, when you are working in an emergency, most of these important aspects of the teaching and learning processes, they are like overlooked. For example, when we talk about the use of technology now, we have to consider that our students are coming from different backgrounds, of which I think as lecturers, what we always chase is to make sure that we conduct our sessions and we dish away the assessments, and at the end of the semester, we have got something to hand over to the university. Because remember, examinations and all, this is one of the most critical aspect of higher education. So now thinking of a student who is in the rural areas, who is even struggling. For example, let's say, I mean, especially when we are looking at this student to lecturer ratio, sometimes you find out you have a class of 200 students. So for you to be able to pinpoint that 5 of my students are always missing, I need to follow up on them and find out what could be the problem. Then I can put down strategies in order to include them. You know, those students might be somewhere far away in the rural areas where they don't even have network. And it becomes very, very difficult to follow up in them and make sure that at the end of the semester, they also have got something and they progress. So the issue of inclusivity, I think most of us, we are still in limbo. And as lecturers, our hands might be a bit tied up. Some of these things, they need policies. And I've seen that even our institution, they had to redraft their e-learning policy. But I don't think it even touches to those things. Of course, we have got issues like students at risk. You have to identify students at risk. But in essence, the steps which are taken to follow up on those students and really go to the core of the problem, to say the student is in the rural area where there is no network, they can't participate in this new normal that we are in. They can only be able to progress if they are in the student's residence. Some of those things might not be, implemented at a higher level. And sometimes as lecturers, we are found wanting to say, what about these students? What happened? What did you do? Did you follow up on them? Even if I follow up on email, the reason that you can't even participate in class, you are not online, it means even the email, you won't be able to receive it. So in terms of maybe DVC, what is it, DVC teaching and learning, in terms of arrangements in about students who are far in the deep and giving them accommodation so that they are also included, in terms of some, obviously in our university they get data, but sometimes you really wonder, they get data after 2 weeks into the month. Then you wonder, people who plan and distribute that data, why didn't they maybe do it a month prior, so that we don't have those gaps. So these are really, really, really critical issues. And even when it comes to us as lecturers, sometimes we prepare our content. There was this direct migration from the traditional classroom when we moved to the online. So sometimes we find that our content, the way we design it, is mainly text. There's no audio, there's no, let me just say, audio visuals or media integration into those learning materials. So it's a learning curve. We are learning as we are going. Thank you very much.
Thanks, John, for sharing that point. I think that's an honest reflection, especially considering the fact that and I like what you said, that we compromised with our move to crisis, saving the academic year. We tended to compromise on these elements. And I think that's actually a very honest reflection on this, because I can think that we all compromised with this, because we put up resources overnight just to save the academic year. We tried to cross over into this education space. But the long run, the kind of damage that we might have been doing while trying to save the academic year in terms of creating inclusive spaces, also in terms of understanding what this means for our student diversity, I think that we cannot ignore. And I think you've touched on those key elements. So thanks for that, John. It's something that we might rethink. And I think for me, why I am flagging this as us to rethink of inclusive innovation is because innovation drives our higher education institutions. If we want to have a separate discourse on on students that are differently enabled, it doesn't tend to get the momentum and the space and legitimacy as we would with innovation. So the idea of us using inclusive innovation, it means that when we talk about innovation, it's not seen as a separate discourse. It's part of the innovation. It's part of the driving agenda in an institution for us to think of compliance and standards as well. So thank you very much, colleagues, and thank you for sharing those important points with us. I think we've got some...
Can I make a
yes,
comment,
Nelisa, please.
Prof?
Yes,
I was looking at the universal design framework where you talk of the UD1 equitable use. And now I want us to shift from a learner and focus on an academic. Don't we have challenges with academics in terms of age and the exposure and the background and challenges that have to do with technology?
Yeah.
And I'm sitting and asking myself, did universities, because of the emergency that happened, did university ever considered this factor to say, we've got academics, we might have academics since we are shifting to online learning. We might have academics because being a professor doesn't automatically qualify as one to be, a techno-savvy. To say, let's put some programs in place, for this group to catch up and be able to go as far as understanding this universal design. Because sometimes we focus on the learner. What about academics who are supposed to, produce information and teach in class? What if they also have challenges?
Yes. Nelisa, you've touched on something that is so important, and I think that has been a major challenge for us and I think the COVID has actually highlighted this for us, is assumed skills to be in place is not really in place. And let me narrow, and I don't talk about other institutions, let me narrow it down to my own institution. Considering the fact that UNISA is an open distance e-learning university, you would think that every single academic at the institution has digital competency because they are they should be communicating with their students virtually. They should be on a learning management system. They should be developing content. But I can tell you for a fact that the last 2020 and 2021 has been one of the most scariest years for me in this institution. And when I think about the fact that I have to engage with some of the colleagues on a daily basis, is that we assume that when we do workshops, we assume that when we do training, we assume when we do webinars, that those listening on the other side have these skills and can just engage and follow. But what it has shown us in this past time is that these colleagues who we assumed to have those core skills didn't have those core skills. We never put it as part of an appointment criteria in the institution that when you function in this particular institution in the country that you must have it. We don't even test those competencies as part of it, right? So what it means is that we are sitting with a deficit of skills, technology skills, basic skills, even some of them are core foundational skills in our institutions. And this is where I like what you said, is the point of a professor is skilled in knowledge. They get their professorship based on the discipline knowledge, not necessarily the skills to facilitate with the technology that they have. And this becomes quite critical for us. And I think you've captured it quite nicely, is the discourse within the university in terms of inclusive technology. Inclusive innovation needs to be more holistic. We need to also think of the learners on one end and the academics on the other hand. If academics are not equipped to deal with this type of inclusive technology and in a proper way, it doesn't make any sense for us to talk about a student learning experience in that. So I think you captured that quite well. And it might be something important maybe when you are answering that question in the study unit, here, specifically on the assignment. I think if you can flag that as an important point on an inclusive approach, even from an academic development or academic professional development perspective, it will flag an important gap that we have in our system as institutions as well. So that's a very important point. Thanks for that. So colleagues, we go on to the next, Dr. Prof. Mposa, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Prof. I have one request here from my colleagues as class rep. They've been asking, first thing they were asking to say these things, the assignment they know is due on 24th and 24th, but they were asking to say, can you give us say up to 26, which is Friday, to submit, because there are so many things now with
Yeah.
exams and marking, and the portfolio on itself is not like a narrative. It comes in bits and pieces. So some were asking to say, can't we give us up to 26 on a Friday?
Yes, Professor Klaus Rep. Okay, so I think from my side, I think you can, the reason why I said 24th initially was Anita told me that they want the marks by 26th. But let me talk to Anita. I think let's work with, for me, this is one of the reasons why I had to cut the content short, because I know I can't expect unrealistic expectations from you at the same time in terms of reading, etc. So let's work, colleagues, with 26. But if I say 26, we have to say that 26th is the deadline. And why I'm saying 26th is the deadline is then if you give me 26th the deadline, then I will use that the 27th, the Saturday and Sunday to mark this. And then I can give Anita the marks on Monday morning. Then my argument to Anita can be quite simply is if I give you the marks late on Friday, it doesn't make any difference whether I give you on Monday morning. So I'll give you the extra 2 days that you can give me. We agree that on the 26th, all assignments and portfolio marks comes in by midnight latest on the 26th, colleagues. And then I'll use that Saturday and the Sunday to mark through it. And then by Monday, we can give Anita that marks. So I think that let's go that way.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Prof.
Pleasure. Okay, so colleagues, when we come back to the assignment question later, we can discuss, we can just keep that as well. So let's look at now the next study unit on evaluating the process and facilitation and learners support in an online learning environment. And we want to talk more specifically about learner support. Now, if you look at how this course has developed, it moved from understanding the changing higher education context, it moved to pedagogy and learning theories, then it moved to some of the innovation, technology, the applications, then it moved in the previous unit to thinking of compliance. And now towards the latter part of it, we shift back to support issues, the learner support issues. So two issues that are the issue of inclusive and the issue of learner support. It's been a challenge in the 2020-2021 COVID crisis, but we can't ignore these spaces, colleagues, even when we start talking about innovation. So the readings here, colleagues, I give you about 3 readings. The first one is entitled a case study on quality frameworks, and here the authors draw from different universities. Then I integrated something on one of the reports that we have at UNISA, an unpublished report, but I want to bring the discussion home. I want to bring the discussion back into our South African context, the reality of where we are. So on point 2 is a reading that draws specifically at UNISA as a case study, but will show you our student challenges, our student profiles, right? And then the last article is by Letseka, Prof. Moketsi Letseka, remember, and colleagues. And you remember we discussed his article on Ubuntu, and here he comes back into the South African context, talks about student retention. Okay. So in the previous unit, as I said, we looked at universal design principles, and here we're now looking at the elements of what it means to offer student support, right? So let's look at the first 2 articles. Now, in the case, we refocus on the first article, looks at student success and retention, and looking at examining specific case studies and the quality framework and identify the types of student support that we offer. And we know that student support has been, and I can go back to the words of John, we compromise student support as well in the aim of saving the academic year. So we try to do minimum and not thinking whether our students have access, and we're just sending out emails. All those were part of our compromising that we also had to endure in the past 2 years. Now, when we talk of the propositions put forward by this case study, specifically the first reading, the authors talk about support services available for online students. Existing support services can be used by online students. New support services are available to online students, and access to support services is needed by online students, right? The types of student support identified, and here it goes beyond colleagues, and this is the discussion. When we talk of education, technology in higher education, while our focus has been to a great extent on the teaching and learning environment, but the teaching and learning environment doesn't work in isolation or operate in silos from the other avenues within the institution. So when we talk of student support identified, we must talk of student support in an holistic framework, right? And it talks about here, for example, admissions and registration, academic advising, orientation to the university and to online learning, academic support services, scholarship and awards, library resources, computer and technology resources, articulation and transfer from other institutions. This could also be RPL as well, and career placement. So you can see the discussion of student support is very holistic. It talks about the different spheres that this touches immediately onto the student space. But what does this mean for us when we start talking of technology integration in and providing student support in a technology integrated, technology enhanced learning environment? So the first one is on course design elements. So the support of students through, for example, course design, support of students through course design, development of course elements and features, as well as two major areas of course structure and content delivery, right? So that's course structure and content delivery when we talk about course design elements. Course structure, systematic implementation of a learning management system, and we've seen this in the past 2 years, 2020, 2021, is that the course structure, systematic implementation. Many universities don't have learning management systems, and some of them don't have robust learning management systems. So it means that the support course content, to the support that we need to offer course content access, online facilitation, assessment, peer-to-peer online learning is missing, right? So learning management system means that we need to think very carefully of an effective learning management system as part of our student support systems. Student management system also contains student data, and this gives access to data, but also access to automation of data. So for example, using students manage student SMS system, etc., to announcements, to issue announcements, etc., as part of this. Course content organization, manage the learning process, the repository for teaching materials, content, PowerPoint, videos, podcasts, and easy navigation, one centralized learning spaces, or also allowing for what we learned earlier on distributive learning. So course content organization is important, is that by integrating technology as part of this and student support, it allows for that centralized space for offering student support, right? Instructional support services provide student support beyond course level, so it means beyond our course instruction, beyond that content. Course software assistance, individual course tutoring, both face-to-face and online, graduate records preparation, supplementary course materials. It also caters for a meeting place for students, a work site, a distribution of course materials, provision for student support, and proctoring of flexibility schedule exams. Proctoring is another word for invigilation, online invigilation. Now, this is important, colleagues, and I tell you why. Is the discussion around this is very critical for us in an institution context. Is that can we honestly say that we have the time within a course to provide this additional support? We don't, because remember, a lot of our modules are at certain credits. It is then built to notional study hours, which comply to those credits offered. And in that, for example, 12 credit, 120 notional study hour, you focus immediately on the course content. So you can't offer that technical support to students because you don't have time. It's not built into your courses. And going back to earlier, the point that Melissa had mentioned is that many academics also don't have that technical support, the technical skills to offer that support. So we need a separate space in our institution that offers this type of instructional support services to our students. And many of our institutions don't have those mechanisms in place. So students end up running all over trying to get this instructional support that is needed for them. If we talk about technology in enhanced learning, if we talk about technology integration, then there is no way that we can have this conversation without having instructional support services. It is critical to any success of student retention, student throughput as part of this issue, right? Now, let's look at academic services. Academic services centers, student retention units, and your colleagues, student retention units, academic literacies, digital literacies, numeracy, all becomes quite critical. But one of the trends that is emerging, and I'm not too sure how it filters into your institutions, but when we have this specific element of first year experiences, we're talking about students that are just coming into an institution, specifically coming into an institution from, for example, from a grade 12 schooling system. And if I'm thinking, for example, in our South African context, Many of our students come from university, from schools that are in the rural areas, for example. Now they're coming to a university that is benchmarks against international practices of technology integration. And some of these students have not engaged with the level of technology that we would want and assume to them knowledge to have in a university, which means then that any first year experience that a student must address those deficits. If we don't close those gaps at the beginning of the first year of the student's experience, it means those students will be making the same mistakes second year, third year, and that has immediate effect on student retention and student throughput. So this is where we really need to think holistically of some of our spaces, right? Course design and technical support, and adding on to the point that Elisa mentioned earlier about some of our staff not having technical support skills. The added element of that is also many of us, our staff, are not instructional designers, neither are they curriculum developers or specialists, right? Which means that academics have content knowledge, academics have discipline knowledge, but there is a level of needed support to put that knowledge in a structured way that it is able to have a seamless flow on an online course, for example. Having an understanding of where the videos will come in, where the learning activities will come in. So that's the added facility, the added element of when we talk of technology integrated, enhanced learning, teaching and learning, technology integrated in our education institution. These are support departments that must come into play, which also means a level of reskilling across our institution, right? Then learning activity, I give you a learning activity that you can then just design. And in this learning activity, one of the elements that we at UNISA did, and I wanted to give you this example because to show you that it's not just theory, it's actually an application of what we are discussing in these courses. So as one of the, we've managed at the University of South Africa, UNISA, through what we call the Academic Development Open Virtual Hub, which was established through a DED COVID response grant. We managed to institute what we call a Adove Mini Studio. And the Adove Mini Studio is a fully automated recording studio. And why we actually initiated this as part of Adove, why I actually put this forward for the institution, is we realized that, even if we have recording studios in our university, you need a level of skills to operate some of those recording studios. And if you have a department that offers these recording facilities, it often means that you are bound to their schedule, you're bound to them, to their time frame, and giving you back those resources that you develop. And that didn't work. Now, during the COVID-19 time, we found that when we had to provide immediate resources to our students in terms of providing them a learnership support, we couldn't provide those type of resources on demand, particularly because of the challenges posed by ICT infrastructure around us. Now, what this meant that is we needed a recording studio, right, that offered firstly an ability to produce videos on demand, but with the professional studio look and feel. So remember, we didn't want to compromise quality, but we wanted to produce something on demand. Thirdly, is that we wanted the studio recording to be with minimal skills for our academics. And as I said earlier, not all our academics have the digital skills to go into a studio, understand how the cameras work, understand how which buttons to press, where to stop, where to record. And many people are using PowerPoints with so this kind of can be quite critical for us. So what we did was we benchmarked against the University of California, and we put in, when you watch this video, you will see what you call a fully functional automated recording studio. Now, what this means is that all the academic needs to do is have a USB stick with them, minimum 2 megabytes for an hour recording, walk into the studio, simply insert the USB into what we call a control panel. And when they insert that USB into a control panel, the entire studio comes on. So the lights come on, the camera comes on, the big screen in the front, which you are able to see what you're presenting, comes on, and the computer comes on. The computer where you put your PowerPoint. So just by simply inserting the USB, you completely automate an entire studio. Then all you do is you simply press record. It records everything that you do in front of the camera. When you finish, you press stop, and you can pull out your memory stick, and you then have the entire studio then shuts off, and you have 1 hour recording or whatever time you have recording on that memory stick, simply by inserting a USB and the touch of one button. That is what we call contextually relevant technology, but fourth industrial revolution technology, right? So when you watch that video, I want you to look carefully at the type of contextualization of the technology, how technology makes it, how we need to think of easy, adaptable, flexible technology that can produce resources for students on demand in terms of support, right? So watch that video, and then the question unpack how such a studio could be beneficial, for example, in your own context in terms of innovation, right? Then understanding the student support and 4R challenges in the South African context. Now, here I draw on specifically UNISA's context, right? And in the first part I talked to you about, we all know about the fourth industrial revolution. We started this right at the beginning of our course. We spoke about the Internet of Things, wireless technology. We spoke about how higher education needs to embrace the technology shift. Now, all that is fair and done. And this is why I left this discussion right for the end of our course, because now it brings us back to and grounds us in reality. Is the technology discourse can be very robust. The technology discourse can be very advanced and benchmarked against international practice, but the technology discourse, innovation in teaching and learning discourse in South Africa, in Africa, must be contextually relevant. We cannot talk about innovation without bringing it to our context. And here I start this particular session from that report on identifying the 6 emerging technologies. We've discussed the 2021 Horizon report, but this reflects on the 2020 Horizon report, where we spoke about machine learning, analytics for student success, instructional design, or open educational, XR, etc. But now here I want to take the discussion back home. What does this mean for us? And Tony Bates, right? Tony Bates is one of the leading educational technologists, and I think I put a video of his right at the beginning as well. And he talks about digital learning skills, knowledge management, independent learning, ethics, responsibility, etc. Right? And as he goes further in that discussion, you would have gained that it talks specifically about thinking of our own context. But now, here, colleagues, is what for me is the most important part. We had the opportunity in 2018, 2019. Now you know that UNISA students are scattered all over the country. And we were able to visit about 771 students participating across the country in 12 regions, from Durban, Richards Bay, Pretoria, Florida campus in Johannesburg, Ekurhuleni, Rustenburg, Giyani, Middelburg, Polokwane, East London, and Parow and George. So we looked at some of the mainline cities like Cape Town, Durban, Pretoria, but we also wanted to capture the student voices from those areas, that are on the periphery of some of our discourses of innovation in the institution. Like, for example, people from Giyani. Some of us don't even know where Giyani is, and I didn't even know where it was until I actually looked at a map and actually had to visit the place. So even like, for example, in George, Parow, those are areas that when we think of our major discourse, we only focus on the cities, the mainland. We don't think of these periphery areas that we have students in, but that still informs our discourse and our strategies within the institution. So here we had the opportunity of visiting these students, 771 students, and capturing some of what are their challenges in an higher education like UNISA, but focused on some of the critical challenges that we could highlight that is applicable to our entire South African context, right? And what does this mean from a student's 4IR readiness perspective for us? Because when we talk of 4IR and all our institutions are talking about 4IR, what does this mean for our student? And I often ask this question, what does it mean for us when we talk about 4IR in an African context? Because the discussion is not innovation purely, it's contextual innovation. And that's what we need to drive. So here we looked at 3 key areas, understanding UDL, what the university philosophy towards e-learning means, understanding the second one on the concept of what we mean by blended learning at an institution such as UNISA, and understanding UNISA's learning management system, right? Now, let's look at some of these things. Now, the first one, 21% indicated that they have some knowledge regarding UNISA's UDL reports, meaning only 21% of that 771 indicated that they knew what e-learning was about, what online learning is about, right? Which meant that 79% of that population had no idea what was the difference between the normal medium and now the crisis intervention medium that we've got, for example, or what any of these education technology means. For them, if it doesn't impact their life directly and they cannot see how it didn't, 21%, so 21%, I mean 79% of our students lack an understanding of what educational technology means in higher education. That for me is worrying, specifically considering the fact that we are moving at such a rapid pace of technology integration in our South African context. And this will be quite interesting for you, colleagues, is that the second focus area I highlighted, for example, how UNISA incorporates blended learning, print-based discussion forums in certain regions that it has, and then the online medium. only 36% indicated that they have a fair knowledge of what this means, and 64% meant that they needed some orientation. Now, this for me was very worrying when I looked at the stats, and then last year in 2020 and 2021, this year, we all started throwing these concepts of blended learning, remote learning, hybrid modes, so loosely in our conversations with students, with an assumption that our students understood what we were talking about. And I can tell you for a fact, colleagues, that while we're talking about the students' deficit and understanding some of these key concepts and what it actually means for us, even our academics were struggling to understand some of these concepts, because many of them were what we're now talking about remote learning to save the academic year. What is remote learning? So these are issues that are critical for us when we start thinking of the broader innovation of providing student support in this area, right? And then the understanding of the UNISA learning management system. Now, this is quite critical for us, specifically thinking that all our institutions have now embraced some form of learning management system. And we know for a fact that as we are advancing these learning management systems, the 4R are pushing more innovative, more advanced apps and third-party plugins, etc., are part of the learning management system. Now, with UNISA, we're moving towards Moodle, currently on Sakai, but we're moving towards Moodle, right? Now, 62% indicated that they needed some form of knowledge of what the learning management system was, with only 38% indicating that they had some degree of knowledge. If we look at 62% indicating that they had very limited understanding of the learning management system, that immediately poses a problem for many of our institutions. If we are to generalize some of these stats, is if our learning management systems are the central space for our students to communicate and get the information and content, and only 62% have a basic understanding, and some of them really needing a more strong orientation to how these learning management systems work. It means that if we do not start providing those core skills, those navigating skills, forget about the fact that, you know, it's the content, the discipline content. Even to get to that content will be a major challenge for many of our students that are exposed to this. So these three elements actually shows us, very importantly, colleagues, is that when we start thinking of student support in an online learning environment, there are assumptions that we take for granted. For example, telling our students go log onto a learning management system and then access your content. Just that might be such a daunting task for many of our students that by the time they get to the content, many of them may be dismayed and frustrated, right? So this for me is quite important, is when we talk of knowledge of learner support, student support, are we simply thinking of learner support to understand the content in an online environment, right? So for example, providing student support for those students who now need to, for example, access to go to the content, complete discussion forums. Are we simply thinking of the discussion of providing support for in the form of e-tutors or face-to-face or additional support on the content itself without engaging the core functions of how to navigate these platforms, those type of skills? It means we will have many students falling out right at the beginning before they even get to content. So this is when we talk of learner support, that our discussions need to extend beyond content to now thinking of the core functions that a student must be able to be competent enough to function in this. Because I know for a fact many of us have already started the discussions on pedagogy of how we teach, those kind of elements. But and this is why I say I left this to right at the end of our course, is to say shift the discourse back, shift the discussion back to start thinking of, do we have those core foundational skills of our students in place, that when we design those fancy courses with all those fancy pedagogies and these fancy videos that we put in, that they can function optimally at that level that we have? And unfortunately, if I have to think of my own institution context, and I think that's where the deficit is we're struggling in that area, simply because we don't have the resources to develop the skills at that student area. And secondly, is the time to actually develop the students competently enough to engage at the level that we want them with technology integration. So you see how the discussion now, colleagues, has shifted right back to understanding our context and our challenges that foreshadows how we integrate technology into this. And this basic digital literacy skills, critical thinking skills, all become compulsory as part of how we think of the 4R element. Now, here, colleagues, as we thought about this technology integration, and as I said, when we think of learner support and why specifically this is positioned at the end, and I opted to position this kind of approach at the end of it, is we need to shift the discussion back to our own context, our own students, our own profile, our own students, profiling our own academics, profiling our own ICT infrastructure to think of how we drive innovation. And here, colleagues, now I give you a cause assessment. And your cause assessment now simply is, I give you a resource. So I've actually downloaded this book for those of you who are familiar with the Human Science Research Council Press. It's a website that also has open access books on it, right? So if you go to that, it's just a simple address at the beginning here. hsrcpress.ac.za, you will find a variety of open access books that you can download for free. It's actually a very good repository. That's not just on teaching and learning, that goes beyond teaching and learning, on a whole variety of elements, right, for multidisciplinary perspectives. But this specific book I've downloaded for you, I shared it to you with you in the morning on an email. And what I want you to do, colleagues, is using this resource. Now, this resource covers a variety of elements from the labor market to higher education to access and success, but from the perspective of student retention, right? So what I want you to do is using the above resource with a focus on chapter 2, which speaks on poverty, race, and student achievement in 7 higher education institutions. All I want you to do is write a very short essay in which you discuss how the transition to technology in South African higher education institutions will be impacted by the factors identified, and how can one address these deficits without creating students that are unemployable, right? So poverty, race, student achievement in higher education, we can't ignore those factors. But remember, at my beginning, poverty and race is critical for us when we start talking about innovation in technology in higher education. But as you read that chapter 2, what does that mean for us in the South African context when we talk about technology in higher education? What does poverty, what does race mean for us in this issue, right? And then also think about what does this deficit means for us if we do not start thinking of integrating technology skills as part of our learner support. Are we simply creating graduates that have the discipline knowledge, like for example, an accountant who is able to give you the accounting skills in a at the end of the year on a written document or in a Word document, and then you assess them, you give them the certificate after 3 years of studies, and you say, now go and find a job. And when they get into the institution or the jobs that the organizations or corporate companies that they want, they are placed in front of a computer and are given a software that they now need to use as part of an accounting package for doing books or whatever it is. We haven't prepared the students for that skill, but when they get into a work environment, they are already assumed to have those skills in place. This is the deficit that I'm talking about, colleagues, is that are we producing graduates that are unemployable at the end of the day? That for me is a critical discussion that you need to have. And here, it's impossible for you to really engage fully. I want you to narrow down on a few perspectives, and 750,000 words, very simply. What does this mean for us in the South African context, in your own context, if you want to narrow it down specifically in your own context? What does it mean for you in your own context, in your own institution, to think about the issue of poverty and race as part of it, right? And this carries 15% towards your portfolio mark. Same criteria as the other one that carries 15% and 750 to 100 words. Okay, colleagues, now before I move to the most critical part for us in the next few minutes, which is the module assessments, let me open up okay, let me do this first. It's 21 minutes now. Let's take a quick 4-minute break. And when we come back, we will open up for a quick discussion on the study unit 5, and then we will discuss the module assessments. So quick 4-minute break, colleagues, for those that want to grab a coffee, anything, because I just want your minds very fresh for the next part that we discuss. So colleagues, just a 4-minute break. We come back in the next 4 minutes, 25 past, and then we will start. Thanks, colleagues.
Thank you, Prof.
Gonna be a busy week for us ahead. Prof. Maposa, are you there?
I'm here.
It's gonna be a very busy few days. I mean,
Very tough one. Actually, from what I was thinking, I thought if it was put in a narrative way, like putting everything in a narrative, it was going to be much better. Than when we put in portfolios, it ties us a lot.
yeah, that I actually thought that you were gonna ask for some streamlining of these.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. I thought the portfolio there, if this other like part of portfolios they come as sections and we put in one narrative, I think it was going to be a bit better because when I look at it, it needs a lot of depth.
Yeah, and it's so unfortunate that we are so busy. I mean,
Yeah.
this is the busiest time of our semester.
These assessments
Yeah.
also marking and submission of marks. So that's why I wanted to say, that's why even last week I raised the issue to say, can't we put in a way, like when you look at the assignment one, how it was done, when he put it in the session there, how he phrased it, it was a
Mm.
bit better to capture to guide us.
Mm.
Now, this one, when it is in these portfolios, of course, they are well organized, but hey, they are
The time
demanding.
constraints. Time
Yeah,
constraints. To be honest
time
with you, for
constraints.
me, yeah.
We actually say we have less than a week.
Hopefully, it won't compromise the quality of our submissions.
That's one thing. So what I was in my mind, I don't know. I was actually having the mind of saying, can't we put it like if he can phrase it in such a way that one can put in a narrative where these they come as sections, of which even if one captures them.
Yeah. But anyway, let's see what can be done. We'll do our best.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll try to engage.
Mm.
Okay, colleagues, interesting discussion. Yeah, I see what you mean. Okay, so colleagues, let's see. I think we all are back now. So let's look at the module assessment because the colleagues have already started the discussion on module assessment. Let's go forward with it, right? Okay, so colleagues, I'm hoping that you all are back. If you can just put a thumbs up, then at least I know that everybody is back. Okay, perfect. Okay, thanks, colleagues. So let's look at the module assessments, right? And let's look at how we structure this. I think without us complicating it too much, right? So the module assessment, remember, according to the DUT core structure, we must have 2 assessments, right? So the 2 assessments that we have is the minimum 2 assessments, right? We changed this date now to 24th. This is the 26th. 26th, that's Friday the 26th. Assignment 1 is the portfolio. Our assignment 1 carries 20%, and assignment 2 then carries 80%. Right? That gives you your total of 100%. Right? So it means that when we're marking these things, we will mark out of 100. For example, your assignment marked out of 100, but the percentage, whatever you get, will then be converted to 20%, the weight of 20% of your final mark. That's the same thing with the portfolio. Each of your activity will be marked out of 100, but then converted to the weighting, and your final portfolio mark out of 100, whatever, will be then count a weighting of 80% towards it. So in that way, you know where your mark breakdown is and what the percentage and weighting of each activity is. So let's look at assignment 1 for those that didn't complete assignment 1 that are still busy with it. So assignment 1, colleagues, focuses on study unit 1, remember? Study unit 1, and each of these assignments are matched to the learning outcome, right? So that you are able to clearly see that what learning outcome you're being assessed on, right? So study unit 1 And I state the learning outcome here. You can also, if you want to, you can state the learning outcome if you want to in your question or in your submission, anything that you want, whatever works for you, right? So case 20%. The question was, blogs are an important medium to express one's own thoughts in the public domain. It also draws for critical engagement by the public where applicable. For this assignment, you are required to write a blog which focuses on the following: a critical reflection on how technology is changing the higher education environment, its developmental and transformative potential, and challenges for the South African context. So your focus should be on reflecting critically on how technology is changing higher education environment, and what does this mean for us? And when we talk about developmental potential, a quick thing here, colleagues, maybe also see if you can tap into the Africa 2063 agenda, etc. That speaks about developmental objectives, right? Transformative potential, transforming the economic of our country, transforming the skills levels of our country, etc. But also the challenges, right? And why I ask specifically for a blog, because remember, a blog is slightly different. It's an opinion piece, which means I want your opinion. I want to see where your thoughts are. So that is part of this. Academic blog, minimum 5 sources, referencing format, use one standard format. Remember, or recall what we said last time. I'm not prescribing a referencing style because each one of you come from your own disciplines, and some disciplines have their own referencing style. I don't want to disadvantage you with that. So all I ask is that you be consistent across. 1,200 to 1,500 words, and submissions you can publish online. Some of you publish online on Facebook or etc. and sending the links. Very impressive. Well done, colleagues. Some of you just put in a Word document. That's also perfect. A Word document or a PDF document, that was also perfectly fine, because I was assessing your writing style of a blog, and I gave you a few examples as well of blogs that you can look at. And I must say that I went through a few that emailed me. I see some of you emailed me, and there's about 5 or 6 that put it up on the link. But I must say that the first round of work, colleagues, some of you have produced excellent work, and you should actually commend yourself for that, for being a bit creative and innovative, critical and innovative at the same time, or creative and critical at the same time. So well done for some of you.
Sorry.
Yes, John. Yes, John. Carry on.
Yes, I fiddled with mock, then I submitted there, but I'm just still wondering if you managed to get it. I never, maybe if there's a way of giving feedback to say received or something like that, so that I won't, because I'm actually thinking of sending again or emailing or something.
Okay.
Like that.
When did you send it, John?
I think sometime last week. I uploaded on the platform.
Okay. Oh, you upload online. Okay. Yeah, if you upload it online, you will be able to see your submission online. I haven't checked the uploads online. The colleagues that have sent me, I've taken note of the ones that have sent me via email, and then I'll upload it for them online on my own. But John, I think if it's missing, later on when I'm marking, when I'm grading, I will just drop those an email and say, listen, I don't have it with me or something. I won't give you a 0 without checking that you submitted as well. So please don't worry about that.
Thank you.
Thanks, John. Okay, so colleagues, this was the first one. So I think everybody grasped that quite well and have an idea. If you're still stuck with doing this one and you're still stuck with this one, please just, and you're having challenges, you can just drop me an email. And remember, colleagues, I said you can submit everything on now, you can submit everything by 26th. So even if you didn't submit the assignment 1, that's fine. That's perfectly fine. You can submit the assignment 1 and the portfolio together. Okay, so that's assignment 1. That's your 20%. Now let's look at where your balance 80% comes from. So your 80% is a portfolio. Your portfolio consists of the following questions. You must submit your portfolio as one consolidated Word or PDF document, right? And each question must comply with the instructions provided on a new page. So simply, your portfolio you must submit your portfolio as one document at the end of it. One document at the end of it. And each question must comply with the instructions for each question, and you must start on a new page. So it must be a new page so we can see where your next activity starts, right? Study Unit 2, colleagues. So the portfolio question for Study Unit 2. Learning outcome, theoretical principles for designing educational technology, interface and usage, 20%, right? So remember, 20% of your portfolio mark comes from here. Question 1. In the study unit, you have been introduced to various pedagogies, learning theories, and key trends in educational technology and education. You are required to write a reflective essay on how these approaches could be integrated into your institution's teaching and learning environment. You do not need to write on all the themes covered, so you can choose one theme and then write a detailed reflection on that. So whether it's a pedagogy, whether it's a learning theory, whether it's a key trend, it can be integrated in the institution. The aim of this essay is to assess how you contextualize and apply knowledge that you've gained in terms of the theoretic principles, designing elements into your own institution. This is an academic essay implying that it should embody academic rigor, cite sources, etc. And I give you a rubric online. But just for here, referencing format similar to the previous one. Use your one format. It's consistent, length approximately 1,200 to 1,500 words. Right, so that's the first part of your first question in your portfolio, which relates to study unit 2. Study unit 3, next question comes from study unit 3 for your portfolio activity. This is learning outcome, innovative practices in the design, development, and implementation of education technology. So we're assessing that in that learning outcome. Here you have 2 questions, right? Write an essay in which you discuss the importance of mobile learning for the African higher education context. In your essay, in addition to unpacking mobile learning, you should also discuss how this approach contributes towards the social learning embodiment within an African context. Directly, colleagues, from study unit 3. Right? Tough one. Okay, directly from study unit 3, right? And then the second part follows on the practical example, right? And here in question 2.2, it focuses on Gilly Salmon's one. And for this activity, imagine that you are facilitating online tutoring, training, or online course, or whatever it is that you're teaching. Choose any part of this course from study unit 1 to 3, right? And all I want you to design is an activity, online activity. Now, colleagues, your activity must be linked to one of the learning outcomes in the study units so that we can actually assess what outcome that you are actually testing your design activity for. I give you some examples, right, of this learning activity, and this counts 10 to balance 10%. It must have a title, purpose, task, where to complete the activity, the word count, due date, guidance, and feedback. Now, for example, colleagues, if I had to give you an example of this, I could have said, watch a video on an introduction to online education technology. So the title of my activity would have been introduction to education technology. The purpose statement will then be for students to have a basic understanding of current trends in education technology. Task would then be the instructions that I give the student. So I tell the instructions, student, watch this video, which is 4.5 minutes. And as part of this video, thereafter reflect on XYZ in the comments column below, right? So where to complete the activity, I'm telling the student to complete the activity in the comments tab below, which is a link that I will post. Word count, I can then tell the student, you are required to complete this activity in, for example, 150 words, right? And the reason why, when we say, for example, you find that I'm using word count even for all our assignments, is because in order for us to have a fair assessment and standardized assessment, imagine if one of you gives me 2,000 words and somebody gives me 500 words. I will have to mark that 500 words and 2,000 words, the difference of 1,500 words. But because I haven't set a standard amount, a minimum amount, it means that I don't have a base to which I need to start assessing each one of you on a fair platform. And this is why it is very critical when you are designing activities that you create that fair space so everyone understands I'm required at minimum to have 1,200 words, which means that all my colleagues in my class will start with a minimum of 1,200 words, which means that I'm on a fair plane, I'm on a safe plane in terms of equal assessment with all my students, right? Due date. You can give any due date. The idea is simply to see time frame, and then guidance and feedback. How will you provide so for example, how would you provide your students or whatever it is with feedback, right? So I could say as part of my activity, feedback will be provided after the due date, and the feedback will be provided on the announcement tab, for example. So I'm creating an activity. I'm telling the students what to do. I'm telling the students where to complete it. I'm telling them how they should complete and what or reflect on it. I'm telling them when it's due. And I'm also telling them how I'm going to provide feedback on this, right? So that's a kind of framework that I want you to think of when you start to design your own activity. Please be as creative as you want, right? The space is yours. Then that's study unit 2 assessment, right? Portfolio. Then study unit 4 assessment, which is learning outcome, which is the learning outcome effective standard compliant education technology, case 15%. And here, question 3. All I want you to do is develop a universal design technology teaching and learning framework for your institution. explain how you would apply the following 5 processes to that framework, right? So we discussed this already. So that carries 15%. Develop a universal technology integration framework in your own institution. And remember, it was Liso that spoke about also understanding the deficit of technology skills amongst academics, and universal design principles also in that context as well. You could apply that to your academic and student cohort as well. So be creative in this. I want to see as part of this, colleagues, that you are able to grasp what the UD principles means in a technology integrated teaching and learning environment or higher education institution, right? 15% for that. Yeah, as well, because minimum three references, standard format, and 750 to 1,000 words, but it only carries 15%, right? Then learning outcome 5, which we discussed already. Learning outcome for study unit 5, which we discussed. Evaluate the process of facilitation and learner support in an online environment. And here the question was to focus on the reading by Prof. Muketsi and Letseka Muketsi, and look at what does that mean for us in the South African higher education context. And I also said that if you want to contextualize it more, find it to your own institutional context, please feel free to do that as well, right? But specifically, what does this mean for us in terms of skill deficits and creating employable graduates? That's 15%. The last 10%, remember, no portfolio activity is complete without your own learning experience being captured as part of the activity, right? So your last activity is for 10%. And in this activity, as part of a reflective journal, write a reflective journal piece on how this module impacted your own understanding of technology in higher education, right? So remember, there's no right or wrong answer here. This is actually the easiest way for you to get that 10%, right? Write a reflective journal piece on how this module impacted your understanding of technology in higher education. So I want to see as part of this portfolio, remember the portfolio is used to demonstrate competency, to demonstrate competence, to demonstrate knowledge, but it's also there to demonstrate their own reflective learning practices. And this is where the last study unit 6, the conclusion, brings in that activity of reflexive engagement with the course content. So all I want you to do here, colleagues, very simple. Write a reflective journal piece on how this module impacted your understanding of technology in higher education. Highlight what are some key ideas, themes, points that you will take from this course into your own context for 10%. Minimum 750 words. If you want to exceed that, you're welcome to do that. So 750 words to capture that for 10%. So colleagues, this is what your portfolio looks like. Each learning outcome per study unit with an activity, the percentage breakdown, and the last activity with which is the reflective activity. All I want you then after to do, colleagues, is simply consolidate all these 5 elements into one PDF document or one Word document, and then you send it to me for grading as part of this. Okay, let's open up the space for discussion now, particularly on the assessment. Okay, see a lot of hands going up. Let's start with John. John?
Okay, thank you very much. This is a new document, right, that you are sharing that gives a breakdown of all the...
Yes. I emailed it to you in the morning. John.
Yep. Right. Thank you very much.
Thanks, John. Okay, sorry, I can't see everybody's name here. Malati?
All right, thank you, Prof. It's Promise Malachi here.
Oh, Promise, thanks, Prof.
Yes. On the study unit 3 activities, if you can go back there.
Got it.
Yes, on the allocation, the percentage allocation for 2.1.
Yeah.
Don't you think it's too little compared to, or rather comparing it with study unit 2? Because I think they are more likely equal in terms of the workload.
Okay, let's do this, John, to compromise with you. I hear what you're going with that, and it makes sense. Let's do this. Let's drop the words to here to help you out and also help the colleagues out. Let's drop the words here to 750 to 1,000. I can't drop the marking, but I can drop the amount of work that we need for that. Will that help you?
Okay, that's better, yeah?
Yeah. Okay, so for 750 words, 750 to 1,000 words, you get the 10% here, right? And we'll drop this to 3 sources as well, similar to the other one. Okay, so that complies with 10%. This one stays as is because this one is more, I want you to apply your mind to this one. So this one, it might not be so much of literally writing as compared to 750,000 words, but there'll be a creative application of knowledge here.
No, I think it's fine now, Prof. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thanks, Promise. Okay, Prof. Mposa, floor is yours. Mposa, the floor is yours. You can just unmute.
Oh, thank you, Prof. You were saying on the changes you were suggesting, you were dropping which one and increasing which one?
No, I'm not increasing any one.
Okay.
Okay, so study unit 3, right? Learning outcome, question 2.1. It's
Okay.
10%, right? Initially, my instructions were to have a minimum of 5 resources and write between 1,000 to 1,500. So because it only carries 10%, less
Okay.
than the amount of work here, I reduced the word count to 750 to 1,000 resources.
Okay. Okay. Yeah.
Perfect.
No, I think my question is answered when I look at it, and also now that at least you have sent also this one on email there, where we can put it as one document, the portfolio as one document. And I think if I captured it well, you have also said that we are going to, each question is going to start on a fresh page.
Yes.
The only question that I may also have is because we have references for each question or each part of the portfolio. Those references will reference. So we'll have let's say question 2.1.
Yeah.
Then it will have its references there. Then we'll go to question 2.2 and question 3 like that, with these references following each other.
That's correct. 100%
Okay.
right.
Okay.
Yeah. Remember, you don't have to put a consolidated list of references at the end of it, because I mark it for each session. So once you've put your references, you can take it for granted as it's done.
Okay. Thank you.
Perfect. Who we have next? Sam. Sam, the floor is yours.
Oh, sorry, my was. Do you want this portfolio to be sent in PDF format or MS Word format?
Okay, preferably, the reason why I asked for PDF is that we've got these online marking tools, so it's easier to mark with a PDF document. However, if you're really struggling to convert to PDF document and you understand a Word document, that's also fine. So whether it's PDF or Word, I will accept both, but I prefer PDF document as for ease of marking.
Okay, no, it's not a problem. I can send it in the PDF. I just want to be, just want to know which one you prefer. Yeah, it's not a problem for me to convert it to PDF.
Okay, perfect. That's perfect, Sam. Colleagues, what I would actually suggest that you do the similar thing that you're doing now, right? I will create a link for you to upload this onto the course site, online course site, like how you did assignment 1. But also, I see many of you are sending me a backup copy on my email as well. I think let's do that. So keep the backup copies of your assignments when you submit it as well. So when you submit your portfolio, if you want to just resubmit your assignment 1 as it as well, please feel free to do that. But I think just send it to upload it, but also send me as a backup. So when I'm consolidating the online one, I will make sure that if it's not captured online, I got your backup on email as well. So I think that's a safe way to go. I saw a comment by Janice. Janice, yes, colleagues, I made some corrections on this, so I will email you this revised the revised assessment structure. I will send that as soon as I finish here. I will send that revised assessment structure. At UL, our ICT division offer various sessions, workshops, semester per year. That's great news, probably Erasmus. Maybe, Lawrence, maybe as lecturers, we all need to short course on technical side of ICT. Of course, we have ICT support. That's actually, John, that's actually an excellent question, John. I think the issue of technical support is quite important for us as an institution, and something that the reskilling that we have to really think about. No, I think that's very important, Sam. You've touched it on, is the reskilling of that part. Okay, colleagues, anything else on? So let's get clarity. So everybody knows what is done, right? So remember, I now I changed the date to 26. But please, colleagues, and I cannot stress this anymore. 26 midnight, please. All assignments and portfolios must be in. I'm negotiating with Anita on the basis that I promise her on Monday morning she would have all the marks, so that I can give you that flexibility. So it means that over the weekend I will need to mark, to literally use those 2 days to mark everything. So please, 26th, our cutoff date, and when I send you the revised one now of the assessments, I'll put on the top 26 midnight as well. Okay, Sam, I see you got your hands again. Oh. Sam?
Okay, yeah. Please, the assignment is also contained in this document you are sending. It's different from this portfolio assignment. Portfolio assignment.
No. The document that I'm sending now will be from here. This old document, but remember, I changed the criteria slightly for one of it, and I changed the date of it. So I'll just add that too, and I'll send you the revised version from here.
Okay, no. What I want to find out is that assignment 1 is that the block assignment.
Yes.
Then
yes.
assignment 2 is referring to the different portfolios.
That's correct. So this assignment 1 is the study unit 1 question. You'll send me that as a separate document. Yeah. And then assignment 2, which is the portfolio, you'll send me all these portfolio now in a separate document.
Okay, thank you.
Perfect, Sam. Okay, colleagues, any other questions?
Yes. I was still going to have access to the UNISA mock because normally
yes.
I depend on it.
No,
I never check my duty for live emails. So we will be able to access it.
Yes, Nelisa, not a problem. What I'm going to do, Nelisa, is that over the weekend, I'm going to upload study unit 4 and study unit 5, and then I'll also upload all this stuff under assessment. So whatever I discussed today and the revised version, you'll also be able to access it fully on the online side. Yeah, you'll have that access.
Thank you.
Thanks. Yes, Malile Matsapa, where's yours?
Thank you, Prof. I was asking about the recording of last week's session. Is it available online? Thank you.
Yes. If you go to the course site under webinar recordings, you'll see I posted last week's, the week before that, and last week's one there. Unfortunately, I don't have the versions earlier as it's on the DUT website, but the 2 that we did so far, I've added it there. And in the course of the weekend, I will add today's one there as well.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. Okay, colleagues, any other questions on the portfolio? I'm hoping that you all are comfortable now with your assessments. It's clear. You understand very clearly what is required from you. If you have any challenges, colleagues, or if you need a little bit of clarity on it, let me say this. Please use the WhatsApp group to find out from the colleagues. Find out from the other colleagues. Also find out from me. But don't, if you're a bit confused, don't submit it in that confusion. Get clarity first, colleagues. So if there's anything that you need, please, I'm here, and I'm sure your peers who are more also knowledgeable of what's happening in the space can also assist. But the main thing here is that we all, at the end of the day, I just want you to really do well for this cause. So let's work towards that. I see one question coming up. Yes, Lawrence, the floor is yours.
Denzel, thank you very much. Colleagues, I hope you can hear me. I had some issues to get online, but I am so glad that I could be here. It was a thoughtful morning again. And I think one of the best things that's currently happening to me is an understanding of the struggles that my students must be going through with the way in which I communicate with them. I now listen to my colleagues, the questions they ask, the uncertainties they have, and so on. And then I think back of my own documentation and communications and announcements that I put on Blackboard for my students. And I'm also wondering, you know, they don't always complain, but do they all really understand what it is that we, or I want them to do? You know, so thank you again for this morning. It's truly a wonderful time to reflect and rethink what I'm specifically doing. Thank you.
Thanks, Lawrence. Yeah, I think that reflection, I think you've captured that quite well, and I like the way you captured it. You know, it gives us an opportunity to reflect on our students' challenges, and often we don't have that space. And we cautioned one of our academics the other day when we had a workshop, and the academic said, "I'm just frustrated with our students. They just don't seem to understand the simple things around assessment." And I said, "But you know, let's just calm down a bit. Let's try to figure out how we are communicating things across to our students. Let's see if they understand that, because it's easy for us to understand what we are trying to communicate, but our students may not be fully grasping that stuff. And that's where I think some of our challenges come out. And we are experiencing this in our own context. When we're doing courses such like this, as Lawrence said, we also are experiencing load shedding. We're also experiencing connectivity issues. we're really sitting in our students' shoes today to understand those type of challenges. And I think it actually means we have a bit more empathy and towards our students after some of these experiences. So thanks for capturing that so well, Lawrence. Colleagues, anything else? It seems that we all have a very good understanding of what is required from us now. You also know what you need to put together. And as I said, I know this course had a lot of readings as part of it, and the readings were there simply to really open our minds beyond this, and then to really get us to engage some of the dominant voices in this space. It's a remarkable 4 weeks. 4 weeks went so fast, but we've actually been with us for about 4 weeks or so now, or actually 5 weeks. 5 weeks with each other, so it's been good with being with you, but also hearing from your challenges and hearing institution context, and for you, those of you that shared some of your examples that you've engaged with. So it's a new discussion for us. It's a new space, and I can hear from many of your conversations that you're actually right there at the point of thinking critically about some of these key issues in the institutions across the country and your own institution as well. So colleagues, I look forward towards your marking your assessments. I'm actually looking forward to that, to be honest with you, because I really want to see how you grapple with this with your own context. Generally, I am not a very difficult marker, so as long as you give me what is required, and I can see, as I said, I can see that the application and the critical thinking behind it, you would do fairly well with this module. And for those of you that have raised those critical issues, please put all that into your portfolio, because those are the kind of things that we are thinking about right from the beginning, the critical elements. Even right at the outset when we spoke about access and stuff like that as well, throw all that into it, because that's the kind of elements that we want to engage with. From my side, colleagues, I just want to say thank you very much. It's been really good with being with y'all, and I hope that you'll really gain some good knowledge from these courses and experiences as well. And then I will look forward to marking your portfolios and giving you marks at the end of the day, and then we can reflect on this as well. So thank you very much, colleagues, and I wish you all the best. Or I would not see you all again unless we chat on the WhatsApp. But also wish you all the best for this last leg of your last part of your course, and I think last part of this last module of the year as well for many of you. And then as you move forward for the rest of the year in 2022 as well. It's been great being with you all, and wish you all the best. So thank you very much, colleagues.
Thank you, Prof.
Thank you, Prof. Thank you, Prof.
Thank you, Prof.
Thank you, Prof. Thank you, colleagues.
I thought Prof. Mapos was going to say last word, since we're not going to meet until next year as our class rep.
Yeah, sure, Prof. Mpozo.
It looks like he's already left anyway.
Yeah,
Bye, colleagues. Those who celebrate Christmas, have a Merry Christmas, and take care and take it easy. Until next day.
Thank you, Nelisiwe.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.